step outside of our payments bubble and you ask the average Joe on the street what a stablecoin is, how you would use it, I would say 9 times out of 10, they're probably not going to be able to give you a concrete/correct answer.
Hello and welcome back to the Payment Expert Podcast, your source for the latest news, insights and analysis on the payments industry. I'm Lewis Thompson, news editor at Payment Expert, and with me today is senior journalist at Payment Expert Callum Williams, and making her first appearance on the show is Payment Expert editor herself, Rachel Kennedy. Rachel, welcome along to the show.
Thanks, Lewis. It feels slightly strange to be on this side of the camera, but yeah, great to be here.
Well, we'd love to have you on again. So if you'd like to get used to it, we'd very much like that. Callum, we know you've been away the last week at MPE Berlin. How's it been over in the German capital? I know Wero, the emerging pan-European A2A payment scheme, has been a particular point of focus. For you, what's different about that compared to other A2A payment schemes that have failed previously?
Yeah, cheers, Lewis. Well, yeah, obviously, as you can maybe tell by my voice, I was doing a lot of talking last week, but a lot of lively conversations around Wero and its viability and capability of becoming a true A2A payment rail that could go on and compete against the likes of some of the US-based companies that Europe are trying to lessen their reliance on, should we say so. But what makes Wero interesting is that it is actually being backed by up to 16 European banks, and some of the prominent ones like BNP Paribas, Deutsche Bank and ING. It's already live in 3 key European markets, so Belgium, France and Germany, and it will also be rolled out in the Netherlands and Luxembourg by the end of this year. So there's 5 European key markets right there that it will be available in. And what also makes it a unique proposition is that it has an immediate cross-border offering. And now this is not something that you look at the likes of Blick in Poland or Bizum in Spain or Ideal in the Netherlands. Those are local providers that are very, very popular in those specific markets, but have struggled to expand and scale those payment offerings within different markets across Europe. So
sure. No, I was just going to jump in, Callum, because obviously it's one of those now that's come up. It's got a lot of attention, but I mean, compared to other A2A payment schemes in the past that have perhaps failed, you look at the European Alliance of Payment Schemes, the Money Project, Payfair, they've all failed. So what is it really that's different about Wero? And, there seems to be this political win behind it. Do you think it may be something to do with an over-reliance on the likes of Visa and Mastercard?
Well, yeah, I think that's one of the main central aspects of why banks and payment service providers are actually kind of pushing Wero, is because I do think it does offer a significantly less interchange fee compared to the likes of Visa and Mastercard. And now you are seeing a lot of pushback now from merchants, especially with the interchange fees that Visa and Mastercard continue to set in place. I know that they've capped in the UK now, aren't they, by 0.2 and 0.3% for debit and credit cards respectively. So I do think it's coming from a political sense and a governmental sense of just being able to have a homegrown sovereign-based payment method that Europe can call its own, and that it can also just benefit the rest of the European payments landscape. And again, just reducing that reliance on Visa, Mastercard, and even payment methods like Apple Pay and Google Pay now.
Sure. Rachel, do you think Wero's got legs? Do you think it's going to succeed perhaps where some of the other payment schemes, the A2A payment schemes, have perhaps not?
Oh, you're asking me to look into my crystal ball now. I mean, I think Wero definitely has legs in terms of political backing. I think the question will come around whether people trust it as a payment method. So as Callum noted, sort of the talk around European payment sovereignty has been going on for quite a long time, and it's always been framed as, I would say, quite bluntly, and there's this view that if Europe builds its own system, it will solve the problem. But I don't know I get the sense this time the conversation's moved on a little bit more and people are being a bit more realistic around what that actually involves. But I think there's also a debate going around about whether there is really a need to replace Mastercard and Visa, because it does work, right? Like everyone trusts it, everyone uses it. From a consumer perspective, there's no real need to replace it.
They do. And I suppose if you're Visa and Mastercard, you would also argue the same point. You don't need to replace us.
Exactly. And I mean, we published an op-ed actually this morning from Kelly Devine, who's Mastercard's European president. And she sort of framed it as that obviously payments is this critical infrastructure that underpins trust and economic activity, and that the debate shouldn't really be around who owns the rail, which obviously is a point they're going to make. But should we be thinking more about what works reliably at scale, which is something that Wero is looking to tackle?
Sure. I mean, you mentioned the angle of the consumer and trusting a kind of A2A payment scheme. A part of Wero is that they've included chargebacks as part of the offering, which is, of course, a very consumer-friendly thing to do. But I mean, is it a smart move? I mean, it's just going to drive adoption, but it may undermine, you could argue, the core proposition of what an A2A payment scheme is, which is essentially cheaper and faster than card rails, but chargebacks can often be expensive. So do you think they've struck the right line there, or have they maybe gone too far into the consumer-friendly lens and almost left the price part a bit on the back burner?
I mean, consumers have sort of been conditioned to sort of expect that level of protection, right? So we now know that if we use a card, there's that automatic safety function that if you don't receive your goods, or the goods are faulty or not of the quality that you expect, you can immediately press a button and your bank picks up the dispute for you. And that has largely been defined by card networks. So Wero probably had to introduce a similar style feature, and in doing so has acknowledged that trust isn't optional when it comes to introducing these new forms of payment. And I don't think you can really disrupt payments without replicating some of those safety nets. I don't know, Callum, if you agree.
Yeah, no, I think David Rintel, who did a keynote speech in regards to not just Wero, but all the local and A2A payment methods that have arisen in Europe over the past decade, he did say that the chargeback feature with Wero is a true novelty, which obviously, kind of like Lewis said then before, it's going to be maybe a bit more costlier for the merchants and maybe some of the acquirers. They may have to start attaching some premiums on pricing. There also could be disruptions within settlement times as well. But it is a double-edged sword, because I think they are trying to scale Wero out. And I think they have obviously identified the consumers over the merchants potentially as a core adoption driver. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where Wero is in the next 5 years and where that adoption has come from.
Yeah, I mean, playing devil's advocate, the slightly uncomfortable question they're going to have to ask eventually is, the more features that you add and the more that you start to resemble the network and systems you've already got in place, are you really being viewed as a competitor if you're doing the same thing?
Yeah, that's true.
The question.
That is a very good question. I do think that if you look at it from the regulatory lens as well, you've got someone like the ECB, who you would imagine would be the biggest cheerleader of Wero. I mean, they've said publicly that they're glad something like Wero exists, and they're hoping it comes into fruition. But when it comes to its interoperability, I think that's where they've expressed doubt. Although then the argument on the other side again could be, well, interoperability is a wide-ranging problem for many rails and for many banks to grapple across different markets. But perhaps more the sentiment that the ECB hasn't fully endorsed it. Can you guys see that as a potential issue going forward?
I don't think it will be an issue long term. I mean, the ECB as a central bank is going to be slightly more risk averse, and I'm sure it's got one eye watching what's going on with Wero. But obviously the ECB's been around for decades, and it's seen that Europe has no shortage of payment systems. I mean, Callum listed off a couple that were sort of country specific, and they don't always speak to each other particularly well. And so unless Wero becomes something that can sit across that ecosystem, which is something the ECB will be really keen for it to do, rather than sit alongside it, I think there is a risk that it just becomes another layer rather than a unifying one. And so it's probably not going to throw its weight behind it until it can see that it's going to meet those sort of baseline recommendations.
And there are obviously a lot of layers at play already. So is adding another layer to the equation a particularly good idea? I suppose you could almost argue that its success is contingent on other things dying off or becoming slightly obsolete in the real space. Callum, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think just harkening back from last week and some of the conversations that were being had around Wero is that I do think that the banks backing it and the EPI as well, I think they are looking at this as a consolidated payment method, one that can stand on its own two legs in multiple jurisdictions. And in regards to interoperability, I mean, it's barely 2 years into existence, right? So there's plenty of time before anyone can truly say this is a competitive payment method that can sit alongside the likes of an Apple or a Google Pay. But I do think if it starts to become more visible in checkout interfaces and consumers are starting to see it alongside the likes of other payment methods, I think it could grow legs. But then again, it does have quite a lot of backing, whereas like a Blick in Poland or an Ideal in the Netherlands haven't really got that same type of central bank backing. But unless they obviously have that in their home market, so. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one. I can't really answer it at the moment.
Sure. Well, I mean, let's go back to the Mastercard point you mentioned earlier, Callum, and you as well, Rachel, that they have called for collaboration rather than pure competition in the space. But I suppose if you look at it objectively on paper, despite what they may say, I mean, it is a direct challenge. There are other direct challenges to them as well, not just obviously in the EU. Do you think do you think their approach is genuine in that they genuinely like the collaboration, or what's your view?
I mean, Mastercard has to collaborate, right? It's in its best interest to be abreast of these emerging payment methods and to at least be part of the discussion. I mean, we ran a piece a couple of weeks ago when there was rumours that a consortium of British banks were going to put something together to rival Visa and MasterCard. And we actually spoke to them and they said, no, we're fully part of the discussions. Like, we're not sitting on the sidelines. And I think MasterCard are also getting their hands dirty as well. So they're not stepping aside and letting new systems take over. They're integrating with them. They're investing in them. They're acquiring parts of them in certain instances, and essentially making sure that whatever direction payments take, they're there. They're still at the table. And something that the op-ed that we ran today mentioned, it was all about sort of openness and innovation sitting alongside sovereignty. And there's this idea that obviously Europe needs its own infrastructure, but it also needs to remain connected globally. And I think what Mastercard's been quite clever is that it's positioning itself as that bridge. So and it's quite a powerful place to sit if it works, but it then does raise the question of, is it collaboration? From the outside looking in, maybe, but from a business perspective, if you're being quite cynical, is it just them maintaining influence in a market that they don't want to let go of?
I think you've got to the heart of the point there, Rachel, because if you look at, I mean, recently Mastercard has acquired BVNK, and what they get with that is the sort of underlying stablecoin infrastructure layer. So if they're calling for collaboration, but then when you look at the next generation, the next wave of how people are going to pay, if they're calling for collaboration now with A2A payments, and then when it comes to stablecoins, they're moving ahead with acquiring that infrastructure underneath, they're moving beyond just the rails. One could argue that, if the genuineness with which they've made that claim, but obviously that's up in the air. They would obviously say say no to that and assume the position of being that bridge that you've characterized for them. Callum, I wonder what you think of it.
Yeah, well, I think the acquisition of BVNK was one that kind of caught everyone off guard, right? Because if you harken back to November, Coinbase were reportedly like on the verge of completing a deal for like $2 billion, and obviously that fell through. Mastercard were originally interested in BVNK even back then, so the fact that they've came back to renew their interest in BVNK and then obviously ultimately acquired them, they're not just acquiring a stablecoin payment company, they're actually acquiring part of the stablecoin market. I mean, BVNK processed $30 billion in annualized stablecoin payment volume in last year. So they're one of the largest stablecoin payment processors. And I think what Mastercard has now in BVNK is an opportunity to really start to lead in the ability to offer infrastructure stablecoin payment rails alongside fiat rails as well, and then just kind of popularize stablecoin payments to the largest consumer bases across the world, really.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want it to sound like I'm holding Mastercard up to some level of extremely high scrutiny, because obviously, stable coins, it's still subject to future regulation. Things may change. It's still quite fragmented. Its use cases seem to be best placed for those cross-border international payments. So it is in a way taking its punt on what the future will look like. Do you think there are still risks in its approach when it comes to the kind of things that the companies, that it is acquiring?
I mean, I think the BVNK acquisition makes sense, but arguably it's probably more defensive than it looks on the surface. So I don't think anyone thinks that Mastercard is going to try and become a crypto player. But as Callum mentioned, sort of BVNK sits at this really unique point in the market where you've got your stable coins, your B2B payments, and your cross-border payments, and taken together, that's a very powerful place to sit. And I guess the risk is that regulation, as you've hinted at, will probably be the biggest hurdle for them. There's still a lack of global consistency around stable coins, where you can use them, how you can use them, what is even classed as a stable coin. We've seen the debate in the US go back and forth between sort of players in the market and the banks. In Europe, the discussion hasn't moved along quite as far. But in order for that sort of payment method to scale, you're going to need to get some sort of clarity. Otherwise, scaling is just going to become too complex, especially for a network that operates across multiple jurisdictions. And then I would say the second biggest risk is probably, again, around that trust piece that we mentioned earlier on. Because I think we've obviously seen the headlines and the reports that show that stablecoin usage volumes are increasing quite dramatically, but it's for very niche use cases still. I don't know how many consumers day to day use stablecoins. I've never made a payment in stablecoin. I don't know whether you guys have. Generally, consumers are still using cards. They understand them. They know what protections they get with them. They know how to dispute payments. Whereas stablecoins, for most people, including myself still, they still feel quite abstract. So there's definitely a gap there that needs to be addressed, both from sort of maybe a financial education standpoint, but also if consumers are going to trust them as a payment method, then there's a role that the market needs to play in bridging that gap to ensure that they move beyond the sort of niche use cases that we're seeing them being used.
I suppose you could also argue that the market doesn't really, hasn't fully decided the best use cases for them. Whether it's sort of, private sort of crypto wallets as they traditionally stand for the private market, and then when it comes to cross-border transactions only, that may be the only use case that stable coins have their use. And then sort of domestically, you're looking at A2A payments as a way forward. the market hasn't decided, and it goes to that sort of crossover, doesn't it? Who decides really? Is it the consumer or is it the market? And normally it's somewhere in between.
I would definitely say the consumer drives it. I think there's a place for innovation, and we're seeing banks sort of drive innovation a little bit more alongside the big sort of networks and the tech companies that are coming through. But ultimately, if people don't understand how it works or people don't trust the method, they're not going to use it. And it might take time for it to sort of build traction within a market. But I think we're still a fairly long way off stablecoins becoming a mainstream form of payment.
So your point is, if the consumers don't know enough about stablecoins yet, adoption, despite the hype that we see working in the industry, is not going to pick up because of that disparity between the people we know that talk about it and the everyday consumer, the person on the street.
Yeah, I mean, we go to events sort of week in, week out, and we hear about stablecoins, and Callum wrote extensively about it during his conversations at MPE. Step outside of our payments bubble and you ask the average Joe on the street what a stablecoin is, how you would use it. I would say 9 times out of 10, they're probably not going to be able to give you a concrete / correct answer. And I mean, even the other day I was in, I can't remember which coffee chain I was in, but there was a guy paying with cash. And again, you've got people who distrust the current digital methods of payment that we've got that are well acquainted. You've got your cards, your banking apps, your kind of contactless payments, and you've still got people using cash because they don't fully understand how they work. So to then think that you're going to get people using stablecoins, I think is just a leap too far right now. I'm not going to be the person that says that stablecoins are never going to kick off, because I feel like that would be tempting fate. But yeah, I think we're still far, far away.
Oh, come on, Callum. What have you got for us? Do you have a view opposed to that?
This is where Callum comes out and tells me that he bought his coffee this morning with a stablecoin.
Yeah, I have like £500 worth of USDC. No, I do agree with the fact that they are very, very niche when it pertains to the use cases. It's predominantly B2B cross-border payments at the moment. But what's interesting about Mastercard acquiring BVNK is that they are one of the most trusted card networks and cards in the whole world. And I think if they were able to, they've also launched a crypto partner program with about 85 digital asset and a few traditional finance firms in regards to collaborating and finding best new use cases for digital currency payments as well. So they can almost now set the standard when it pertains to digital currency payments, new use cases, how consumers can start to learn about the benefits of near instant settlements and cheaper remittance fees. And I think they could potentially become a leader in this respect as well. And I think it was clever of them to come in after Coinbase. The Coinbase deal failed because they've kind of taken a share of that market now back into the traditional realms, whereas it was mostly held in the DeFi area as well, stablecoin payments, that is. So all in all, I do think it's, when it pertains to stablecoins and stablecoin payments, and yes, we heard about it like far too much last year in the event circuit, but there's genuine use cases and real world use cases that are being developed right now. It's also important for financial inclusion. You're seeing a lot of use cases happening out there in Africa at the moment for the underbanked populations in those areas. So, yeah, I believe they will start to increase in adoption. Let's say 2030. Let's put a date on it.
Heard it here first, guys. 2030, stablecoins are your mainstream payment
I've marked
method.
it in my calendar for 2030. Callum's prediction of stablecoin adoption. Well, thank you guys both, Rachel and Callum. We're unfortunately out of time today. Join us next week, of course, where we'll provide reactions from on the ground at Pay 360, where Rachel and I shall be attending. And if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the Payment Expert podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, as we bring you plenty more insights and analysis over the coming weeks. And for the latest news as it happens, head to paymentexpert.com. See you next time.